David stood at the window of his modest apartment, watching the rain weave delicate patterns on the glass. Outside, the small town moved at its usual sluggish pace, the streets dotted with a handful of pedestrians hurrying home beneath umbrellas. The gray sky mirrored David's mood, the clouds heavy with unspent tears he refused to shed. His fingers, calloused from years of work now gone to waste, fidgeted with the fabric of the tattered curtain. Another day, another rejection. The email had come that morning, its polite but impersonal tone echoing the countless rejections before it. "Thank you for your interest. We regret to inform you." He hadn't even finished reading it. The words blurred together, meaningless. His savings were dwindling. Bills stacked like a precarious tower on his kitchen counter. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and the prospects of meeting it seemed slimmer by the day. David sighed, stepping away from the window. His apartment was a testament to his current state: sparse, functional, but lacking in life. A couch with a fraying edge, a coffee table cluttered with empty mugs and crumpled papers, a bookshelf holding more dust than books. He had once dreamed of filling it with stories, novels, histories, maybe even a few of his own journals. Now, it seemed an impossible luxury. As he moved to the kitchen to brew yet another cup of coffee, the sharp sound of his phone vibrating broke the silence. He picked it up, already knowing what it would say. Another automated job alert, another opportunity he would apply for and likely never hear back from. "Great," he muttered, his voice thick with sarcasm. Another shot in the dark. The days blended into each other like this, searching, hoping, and slowly losing the energy to believe that anything would change. Nights weren't any better. The loneliness that pressed against him during the day became unbearable in the quiet hours. He'd turned to his small collection of DVDs, watching the same movies over and over again to fill the silence. It wasn't living, it was surviving. Across town, the world seemed to tilt on its axis as an event of unprecedented significance unfolded. Queen Amara of Zarathonia had arrived on Earth. The announcement had taken the world by storm. News channels buzzed with speculation, their anchors' voices charged with excitement. Zarathonia, a planet of crystalline cities, vast floating gardens, and a civilization centuries ahead in technology, was the jewel of the galaxy. Its queen, Amara, was a figure of almost mythical proportions. Stories of her beauty, intelligence, and authority had spread across planets like wildfire. Some called her a goddess. Others whispered that she was untouchable, as distant and inscrutable as the stars themselves. But tonight she was here, gracing Earth with her presence. The diplomatic visit was a gesture of goodwill, her way of extending Zarathonia's hand to a species still finding its footing in the wider galactic community. A grand charity gala had been arranged in her honor, with Earth's elite clamoring for invitations. Cameras flashed as Amara stepped from her ship, a vision in flowing silver and violet, her every movement a study in elegance. What no one saw, not even her most loyal advisors, was the weariness beneath the poise. Amara's life was one of constant performance. Every gesture, every word, every glance was scrutinized. Her position afforded her power beyond measure, yet it was a gilded cage. The cheers of her subjects echoed hollowly in her ears. Behind her radiant smile, she carried a loneliness that even the most opulent of palaces could not alleviate. David wasn't planning to attend the charity gala. He had only agreed to go when an old friend, whom he hadn't spoken to in years, offered him a last-minute ticket. "It's free food," his friend had said with a laugh. "And who knows? Maybe you'll meet someone important." Unlikely, David had muttered under his breath. But with little else to do, and the lure of a distraction, he found himself donning his best, though still modest suit, one he hadn't worn since his cousin's wedding 3 years ago. The venue was a far cry from anything David had ever known. A sprawling banquet hall glimmered with chandeliers, their light casting golden patterns on the marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers and the hum of animated conversation. David felt like an intruder, a man out of place among the sleek, polished crowd. Wealth and power seemed to hang in the very air, suffocating him. He kept to the edges of the room, nibbling on hors d'oeuvres and sipping water he'd poured into a wine glass, trying not to draw attention. The guests, resplendent in designer outfits and glittering jewelry, didn't seem to notice him, a fact for which he was both grateful and bitter. That was when she entered. Queen Amara's presence was like the sun breaking through a storm. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She moved with the kind of grace that could only come from someone accustomed to being watched. Her gown shimmered like liquid starlight, and her crown, a delicate weave of silver and amethyst, seemed to amplify her already magnetic aura. David had no intention of looking. He had no business gawking at royalty, let alone someone as renowned as Amara. But something about the sudden hush in the room drew his gaze. When he saw her, his breath caught. It wasn't her beauty, though it was undeniable, but the way she carried herself. She seemed untouchable, yes, but also lonely. For a fleeting moment, David felt as if he understood her. A queen, admired by all, yet as isolated as he was in his tiny apartment. Their first interaction was entirely unexpected. David, shifting awkwardly to avoid a group of particularly haughty-looking guests, accidentally backed into the queen's path. Her attendants bristled, but Amara raised a hand, stopping them with a subtle gesture. "I apologize," David stammered, his face burning with embarrassment. Amara's gaze softened, the faintest trace of a smile gracing her lips. "No need. Are you enjoying the evening?" David's answer was honest, if not entirely appropriate. "I'm not sure I belong here." Her eyes lingered on him, as if weighing his words. "Perhaps that's what makes you stand out." The moment passed quickly, and Amara was swept away by her entourage. But something about the brief exchange lingered in David's mind, a flicker of connection in a place he had expected none. That night, as David lay in bed, staring at the cracks in his ceiling, he couldn't shake the image of her. Queen Amara, radiant and regal, yet somehow achingly human. He didn't know it yet, but that single encounter had set his life on a path he could never have foreseen. And far above, in the quiet sanctuary of her private chambers, Amara sat by a window, gazing out at Earth's night sky. For the first time in years, she felt a stir of something unfamiliar, a curiosity, a longing for something real. Someone real. David awoke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of his apartment, the golden rays doing little to ease the heavy weight on his chest. The previous night felt like a fever dream, one moment of surreal grandeur nestled among the endless monotony of his days. He could still see Queen Amara's piercing gaze, her enigmatic smile. Her words, "Perhaps that's what makes you stand out," echoed in his mind. He told himself to forget it. A queen, let alone one as extraordinary as Amara, wouldn't spare a second thought for someone like him. The rest of the morning passed predictably. He shuffled from his bed to the kitchen, reheated stale coffee, and opened his laptop to scan job postings. The same dead ends stared back at him. His inbox mocked him with unread rejection emails. As the minutes ticked by, the faint hope that had sparked in him last night withered away. He was back to reality, back to the grind. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Queen Amara's day began with an entirely different rhythm. The Zerathonian embassy had arranged back-to-back meetings with Earth's dignitaries, all vying for her attention. They presented proposals, discussed alliances, and draped their words in the honeyed tones of diplomacy. Amara listened with practiced grace, her outward demeanor impeccable, but her thoughts wandered. She couldn't forget the man from the gala. It wasn't just his words or his awkward charm that lingered in her memory, it was the way he had looked at her. Not with awe, not with calculation, but with something she rarely encountered: sincerity. David had been utterly out of place in that room of pretense and posturing, and yet he had felt more real than anyone she'd spoken to in years. His quiet honesty had stayed with her, a thorn of curiosity she couldn't ignore. By midday, she had made a decision. It was impulsive, uncharacteristic, and by her advisor's standards, completely unorthodox. But Amara had long ago learned that the moments she trusted her instincts were often the moments that shaped her destiny. David had just started drafting yet another cover letter when a sharp knock at his door startled him. He glanced at the clock, 11:37 a.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. Reluctantly, he got up, brushing crumbs off his wrinkled shirt, and opened the door. Two figures stood there, dressed in sleek, silver uniforms that gleamed faintly in the sunlight. Their expressions were unreadable, their postures unnervingly rigid. Behind them, a small hovercraft hummed softly, its Zerathonian emblem gleaming on the side. David Foster, one of them, asked, his voice crisp and professional. David blinked. Yes. You are requested to accompany us to a meeting. Her Majesty, Queen Amara, wishes to speak with you. David stared at them, convinced he must have misheard. I what? The Queen? Queen Amara? Are you sure you've got the right guy? The guards exchanged a glance. The one who had spoken nodded firmly. There is no mistake. Please gather anything you may need for travel. We will escort you. David's mind raced. This had to be a prank, or maybe he was still dreaming. But the uniforms, the hovercraft, the sheer gravity of the situation, all felt too real to dismiss. With shaky hands, he grabbed his wallet, his phone, and a jacket before following them outside. His neighbors peeked through their curtains, their faces pressed against the glass, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disbelief. The journey to the embassy was a blur. David sat in stunned silence as the hovercraft soared over the city, its smooth hum filling the air. The skyscrapers looked like toys beneath them, the streets a patchwork of lines in motion. He clutched his knees, half convinced he would wake up at any moment, back in his dingy apartment with the crushing weight of his reality. When they arrived, he was ushered through corridors that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Zerathonian design was unlike anything David had seen before, sleek, fluid, as though the walls themselves were alive. Finally, he was led into a spacious room with tall, arched windows that framed a breathtaking view of the city below. And there she was. Queen Amara stood by the window, her figure silhouetted against the sunlight. She wore a deep sapphire gown that shimmered with every movement, her crown subtle yet unmistakably regal. When she turned to face him, her expression was calm, but her eyes held a glimmer of curiosity. David Foster, she said, her voice warm and steady. Thank you for coming. David opened his mouth, then closed it again, completely at a loss for words. Finally, he managed to stammer, "Why, you're welcome, Your Majesty." Amara's lips curved into a faint smile. Please, sit, she gestured to a chair across from her, where a low table was set with refreshments. David obeyed, feeling as though his legs might give out if he didn't. I imagine you're wondering why you're here, she began, pouring tea into 2 delicate cups. Our meeting last night left an impression on me. You spoke honestly, without pretense. It's a rare quality. David blinked, struggling to process her words. I didn't think I said much of anything. That's precisely what intrigued me, she replied, taking a sip of her tea. You were authentic, unfiltered. It made me curious. Her gaze softened as she set the cup down. You mentioned that you felt out of place, that this wasn't your world. I understand that feeling more than you might realize. David's brows furrowed. With all due respect, Your Majesty, you're a queen. How could you possibly? Being a queen doesn't make one immune to loneliness, she interrupted gently. If anything, it amplifies it. The room fell silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air. David wasn't sure how to respond. What could he, a jobless man from a small town, possibly say to the most powerful woman in the galaxy? I have a proposal, Amara said, breaking the quiet. Come work for me. David blinked. Excuse me. Be my personal attendant, she continued, her tone calm but firm. Live in my palace. Assist me with day-to-day matters. It's not a grand position, but it would give you purpose and perhaps a fresh start. David stared at her, his mind reeling. The offer was so absurd, so surreal, that he couldn't quite grasp it. Why me, he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. Because I believe you see things differently. You're not afraid to be yourself, even in a room full of people who pretend to be something else. I could use someone like that. David hesitated. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to escape the monotony and hopelessness of his life. But it was also terrifying. Could he really leave everything he knew behind? Could he live in a world so far removed from his own? I don't know if I'm the right person for this, he admitted. Amara smiled faintly. Perhaps. But sometimes it's the people we least expect who make the greatest difference. The words lingered in his mind as he looked out the window at the sprawling city below. The choice was his, and for the first time in a long time, David felt a flicker of hope. "I'll do it," he said softly. "I'll take the job." Amara's smile widened, a genuine warmth lighting her features. "Then welcome to Zarathonia, David Foster. Your new life begins now." David's first steps into the Zarathonian palace were an assault on his senses. The air felt different here, subtly infused with a light floral scent that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The walls shimmered, a blend of crystalline structures and smooth, metallic panels that glowed faintly in shades of lavender and silver. The corridors twisted and spiraled, leading to vast chambers that seemed to defy gravity, gardens suspended in mid-air, cascading waterfalls that flowed upward, and walkways made of translucent material that gave the sensation of walking on air. For all its splendor, David felt dwarfed by it all. His steps echoed in the expansive hallways as palace staff, dressed in sleek uniforms that hugged their movements like second skins, moved with quiet efficiency. None of them paid him much attention, though he caught a few sideways glances, curiosity mixed with skepticism. He could hardly blame them. He didn't belong here. His plain clothes, wide-eyed wonder, and fumbling attempts to adjust made him stand out in stark contrast to the polished elegance of everything around him. Still, he was here, and for better or worse, this was now his life. David's quarters, though modest by Zarathonian standards, were unlike anything he had ever known. The walls glowed softly with a customizable light that adjusted to his mood. A circular bed hovered just above the floor, and a large, transparent window offered a breathtaking view of Zarathonia's capital, a city of spires and domes, alive with shifting lights and soaring ships. He stood at the window that first evening, watching the city hum with life. It was beautiful, alien, and overwhelming all at once. His reflection stared back at him, the same tired eyes and worn features that had once blended into the monotony of his old life. Now they seemed even more out of place against the backdrop of this futuristic world. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find a small device on his desk glowing faintly. Tentatively, he pressed the button. David Foster, came a familiar voice. Queen Amara's voice. "Are you settling in?" He stumbled over his response, his voice tinged with nervousness. Yes, Your Majesty. It's ... incredible. Overwhelming, but incredible." "I'm glad to hear that," she said, her tone warm but composed. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, your duties begin." The next morning, David was escorted to the Queen's private chambers by a young attendant named Lyra. Unlike the other palace staff, Lyra was more approachable, her demeanor cheerful and unguarded. "Don't worry," she said as they walked. "The Queen may be the most powerful woman in the galaxy, but she's kind. If you're honest and hardworking, she'll appreciate it." David nodded, though her words did little to ease his nerves. When they arrived at the Queen's chambers, Lyra gave him an encouraging smile before leaving him to face the towering, ornate doors. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The Queen's private chambers were as grand as he had expected, yet there was an unexpected intimacy to them. The space was filled with personal touches, a collection of delicate glass sculptures, books in languages David couldn't recognize, and a large ornate window that overlooked a serene garden. Amara stood by the window, dressed in a flowing gown of deep emerald that caught the morning light. Her crown was absent, her hair cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. She turned as he entered, her expression calm but inquisitive. "Good morning, David," she said. "I trust you slept well." "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you." She gestured for him to sit, and he hesitated before taking a seat across from her. A small table between them held a steaming pot of tea and 2 cups. "I want to make something clear," she began, her tone firm but not unkind. "Your role here is not merely to follow orders. I chose you because I believe you can offer something unique: honesty, perspective. Do not be afraid to speak your mind." David nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what she meant. He sipped the tea she poured for him, the flavor delicate and floral, unlike anything he'd tasted before. Their first meeting was brief but revealing. Amara outlined his duties, assisting with her personal schedule, organizing her correspondence, and providing input when asked. It was clear that she valued not just efficiency but trust. By the time he left her chambers, he felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility. She had placed a surprising amount of faith in him, and he was determined not to let her down. As the days turned into weeks, David settled into his new role. He shadowed Amara during her meetings, learning to navigate the complexities of Zarathonian politics. He accompanied her on walks through the palace gardens, where she shared snippets of her life memories of her childhood, the weight of her responsibilities, and her fascination with Earth. David, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He told her about his struggles back home, his feelings of failure and inadequacy. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft with understanding. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Amara revealed her vulnerability, the loneliness that came with being a queen, the constant pressure to be perfect. David saw a side of her that few others ever glimpsed, a woman who, despite her power and poise, was as human as he was. One evening, she took him to a hidden garden, within the palace, a quiet, secluded space filled with bioluminescent flowers that glowed softly in the twilight. "This is where I come when I need to think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It reminds me that even in the darkest moments, there is light." David looked at her, the glow of the flowers casting a gentle radiance on her face. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he said, surprising even himself with the boldness of his words. Amara's gaze met his, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to dissolve. "Perhaps not," she said softly. Over time, their relationship deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. Amara began to seek out David's perspective on matters both trivial and significant. He, in turn, grew more confident in his role, finding purpose in the connection they shared. But their bond did not go unnoticed. Whispers began to circulate among the palace staff, questions about the queen's growing closeness to her earthborn servant. Some saw it as a distraction, others as a threat. David tried to ignore the murmurs, but they weighed on him nonetheless. Despite this, he couldn't deny the profound shift in his life. For the first time, he felt seen not as a failure, not as an outsider, but as someone who mattered. And in Amara's eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in anyone else: genuine understanding. As he stood by her side, watching her navigate the complexities of her world, David realized something else. She had given him a second chance, but she had also found something in him, something she had been searching for, perhaps without even knowing it. And though their journey together was only beginning, David knew one thing for certain: his life, and hers, would never be the same. The evening began like any other, with the soft hum of activity in the Zarathonian palace. David had spent the day following his usual schedule, organizing Amara's diplomatic engagements, reviewing her correspondence, and marveling at how she moved through her world with such effortless grace. But there was an energy in the air tonight, a sense of something stirring just beneath the surface. When Amara summoned him to her chambers after dinner, he expected it to be another planning session for the coming week. Instead, she greeted him with a mischievous smile, a rare and disarming expression that immediately set him on edge. "David," she said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement, "how well do you know Zarathonia?" He hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I suppose ... not very well, Your Majesty. I've seen the palace, some of the city from my window." Her smile widened, and for a moment she looked almost playful. "Then it's time we change that. Come with me." David blinked, caught off guard. "Now? Where are we going?" "You'll see," she said, already moving toward a side door that led away from the main halls. Her emerald gown swirled around her as she walked, a shimmering wave of elegance that only added to the mystery. David hurried after her, his curiosity outweighing his reservations. The door led to a private corridor, dimly lit and far less ornate than the rest of the palace. It twisted and turned, descending deeper into the structure, until they reached a hidden exit that opened onto a quiet street. It wasn't the polished thoroughfare David had seen from his quarters, with its sleek hovercrafts and glowing walkways. This was a different side of Zarathonia, grittier, more alive. The streets were narrower, the buildings closer together, their crystalline exteriors marked with signs of wear. The air was filled with the scent of spices and machinery, and the hum of conversation mixed with the distant rhythm of music. "This is the lower city," Amara said, her voice softer now, almost reverent. "It's where most of my people live and work. The heart of Zarathonia." David looked around, taking in the bustling marketplace they had stepped into. Vendors lined the streets, their stalls overflowing with vibrant fruits, intricately woven fabrics, and strange, glowing artifacts. Children darted between the crowds, laughing as they chased small, floating creatures that looked like living wisps of light. "It's incredible," he said, unable to hide his awe. "Why did you bring me here?" Amara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I spend so much of my time in the palace, surrounded by advisors and dignitaries. It's easy to lose touch with the reality of my people's lives. I come here to remind myself of who I serve, and I thought ... you might appreciate seeing this side of Zarathonia." David felt a surge of gratitude at her words. She didn't just rule, she cared. It was a side of her that he had only glimpsed before, but now it stood in sharp focus. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me with this." She smiled, a softer, more genuine smile than he was used to seeing. "Come on. There's more to see." They wandered through the marketplace together, blending into the crowd as much as Amara's status allowed. She wore a simple cloak that concealed her gown, but her regal bearing and striking features still drew attention. People whispered as she passed, their expressions a mixture of surprise and admiration. Amara stopped at a stall selling delicately carved figurines, each one glowing faintly from within. The vendor, an elderly Zarathonian woman with kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "Your Majesty," the woman said, bowing deeply. "An honor as always." Amara picked up one of the figurines, a small bird with wings outstretched. "These are beautiful," she said, her tone genuine. "How long does it take you to make one?" "Several days, Your Majesty," the woman replied. "But they bring light to dark places, so it's worth the effort." Amara smiled and purchased the figurine, handing it to David. "A gift," she said simply. David took it, the tiny bird warm in his hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice tinged with wonder. "It's incredible." As the night deepened, Amara led David to a quieter part of the city, where the bustling market gave way to winding alleyways lit by soft, flickering lanterns. The sounds of the crowd faded, replaced by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional murmur of voices. They reached a small plaza surrounded by low buildings, each one marked with glowing murals that told stories of Zarathonia's history. In the center of the plaza stood a fountain, its water flowing in intricate patterns that seemed to defy gravity. Amara sat on the edge of the fountain, gesturing for David to join her. For a moment they sat in silence, the glow of the murals casting gentle light around them. "I come here often," she said finally, "when I need to think. It's peaceful, isn't it?" David nodded. "It is. I can see why you like it." She looked at him, her expression contemplative. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to live a different life? To leave everything behind and start over?" David hesitated, sensing the weight of her question. "I used to think about it all the time," he admitted. "When things were at their worst, I dreamed of running away, finding somewhere new where no one knew me." "And now?" she asked, her gaze searching. He met her eyes, the sincerity in her voice compelling him to be honest. "Now ... think I'm finally starting to figure out where I belong." Amara's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes held a hint of sadness. "I envy you," she said softly. "For me, there is no running away, no starting over. This crown is mine to bear, no matter how heavy it feels." David wanted to say something to comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he placed the glowing bird figurine she had given him on the edge of the fountain. Its light reflected in the water, casting ripples of radiance across the surface. "You bring light to dark places," he said, echoing the vendor's words. Amara's gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of her crown seemed to lift. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "but even the brightest light needs a spark." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. A young man ran into the plaza, his face pale with panic. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing quickly. "There's been an incident at the east sector. The security barrier has failed." Amara stood immediately, her regal demeanor returning in an instant. "How bad is it?" "Significant, Your Majesty. Unauthorized ships have entered the area." David's heart raced as he watched her transform from the vulnerable woman he had been speaking with into the composed queen he had first met. "We need to go," she said, her voice firm. "David, stay close." The journey to the east sector was a blur of movement and tension. They boarded a sleek transport ship that cut through the air with astonishing speed. Amara stood at the helm, issuing orders with calm precision, while David clung to a rail, trying to process what was happening. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. Ships hovered in the sky, their lights casting ominous shadows over the area. Zerathonian security forces moved in coordinated patterns, their sleek armor glinting in the light. Amara stepped forward without hesitation, her presence commanding immediate respect. David stayed close, his pulse pounding. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't leave her side. By the time the situation was under control, the first hints of dawn were painting the sky. Amara's composure never faltered, even as exhaustion etched faint lines on her face. David, too, was drained, but he couldn't help but feel a newfound admiration for her strength. As they returned to the palace, the city quiet once more, Amara turned to him. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked, surprised. "For being here," she said. "Sometimes that's enough." David didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. In that moment, he realized something: for all her power, all her grace, Amara wasn't invincible. She was human, and for the first time he felt like he might truly belong by her side. The whispers started the morning after the incident in the east sector. David noticed it first in the way palace staff avoided his gaze, their usual politeness laced with something colder. Lyra, who had been his friendly guide during his early days, now spoke in clipped sentences, her warmth replaced by formality. Conversations hushed whenever he entered a room, and he felt the weight of unspoken words pressing on him like a stone. At first, he thought he was imagining it. He convinced himself it was paranoia, the remnants of adrenaline from the chaotic night before. But by midday, the truth was unavoidable. The palace had begun to take notice of his growing closeness to Queen Amara, and not everyone approved. David stood by the large arched window in his quarters, staring out at the crystalline city. The figure in Amara had given him sat on the desk behind him, its faint glow a reminder of the fragile bond they shared. He turned it over in his hands absently, lost in thought. The events of the previous night played on a loop in his mind: the chaos, Amara's unshakable leadership, and the way she had thanked him afterward, her words simple but profound. "For being here." It should have been enough. But now, as the walls of the palace seemed to close in around him, David wasn't so sure. He was an outsider, and no matter how much Amara trusted him, the rest of Zerathonia's elite clearly did not. That evening, Amara summoned him to her chambers. When David arrived, she was seated by the window, her usual composure tempered by a visible weariness. The crown she often wore during formal occasions sat on a nearby table, its intricate design gleaming in the soft light. Without it, she looked almost ordinary, except that nothing about Amara could ever truly be ordinary. "David," she said, her voice carrying a note of relief. "Sit." He obeyed, taking the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with things unsaid. "You've noticed, haven't you?" she finally asked, her eyes meeting his. David hesitated, then nodded. "They're talking about us." Amara sighed, her gaze drifting to the city outside. "They always talk. It's one of the burdens of leadership. Every action, every word is scrutinized." "It's not just me," though David said, his voice low. "It's you, too. They think I'm taking advantage of my trust," she finished for him, her tone sharp but not directed at him. "Yes, I know." Her calm acknowledgement stunned him. "Why aren't you angry?" Amara's lips curved into a faint, wry smile. Because it's not new. Every decision I make is questioned, David. Every relationship I have is dissected. If I allowed their whispers to dictate my life, I would have nothing left. David leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. But what if they're right? I mean, who am I, really? A nobody from Earth who somehow stumbled into the most important role of his life. Maybe I'm not. Stop, Amara interrupted, her voice firm. You are not nobody. She leaned toward him, her gaze fierce. Do you think I brought you here on a whim? Do you think I would trust someone unworthy of it? Her words hit him like a bolt of lightning, silencing the doubts swirling in his mind. She straightened, her expression softening. I've spent years surrounded by people who only see the crown, not the person who wears it, she said quietly. You're the first who's dared to look beyond it. David swallowed hard, his chest tight. I just don't want to make things harder for you. Amara smiled then, a genuine, unguarded smile. You make things easier, David. More than you know. The tension in the palace reached a boiling point 2 days later. A formal council meeting had been called, ostensibly to discuss the aftermath of the East Sector incident. David, as Amara's attendant, stood at her side, dutifully taking notes and remaining silent as the advisors debated strategies and policies. But the conversation soon took a turn he hadn't expected. One of the senior counselors, a tall, stern man named Carrion, cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if I may speak frankly. Amara nodded, her expression unreadable. You may. Carrion's gaze flicked briefly to David before returning to the Queen. There has been concern among the council regarding your recent decisions, specifically your choice of personal attendant. David froze, the blood draining from his face. He kept his eyes on the datapad in his hands, but he could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. Amara's voice was calm but cold. Go on. Carrion shifted uncomfortably but pressed on. With all due respect, Your Majesty, Mr. Foster an outsider, unfamiliar with our culture, our ways. His presence has raised questions among the staff and the public, questions about his influence. The implication hung in the air, heavy and damning. David wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear entirely. But Amara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Questions, she said slowly, her tone icy. Or accusations. Carrion hesitated, clearly caught off guard. I mean no disrespect, Your Majesty. I only wish to protect the integrity of your position. Amara rose from her seat, her movements deliberate and graceful. The integrity of my position, she said, her voice rising just enough to command attention, is not threatened by the presence of someone who has shown me nothing but loyalty and honesty. Her words were a shield, a declaration that left no room for argument. She stepped closer to the council table, her gaze sweeping over the advisors. David Foster is here because I chose him. Because I value his perspective, his humanity, and his courage. If any of you doubt my judgment, I suggest you speak plainly now. The room fell silent. Carrion looked away, his expression a mix of embarrassment and frustration. No one else dared to speak. Amara turned to David then, her expression softening. David, wait for me outside. He nodded, grateful for the reprieve, and quickly exited the chamber. Once outside, he leaned against the wall, his hands trembling. He could still hear the echo of her voice, defending him with a conviction he hadn't realized she possessed. Later that evening, Amara found him in the palace gardens. The air was cool, the bioluminescent flowers casting soft light over the paths. She approached quietly, her footsteps barely audible. You handled yourself well today, she said. David let out a humorless laugh. I didn't do anything. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to stay silent, she said, her tone gentle. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Amara thank you. For standing up for me. She smiled, a bittersweet curve of her lips. You're worth standing up for. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the day melting away in the quiet of the garden. Amara reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "I've spent my life bridging gaps," she said softly. "Between worlds, between people. But you've shown me that some divides aren't meant to be crossed alone." David looked at her, his heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. "Then let's face them together." Amara's smile deepened, and in that moment, the gap between their worlds didn't seem so vast. Together they had found something rare and precious, a connection that transcended titles, power, and expectation. And as they stood beneath the glowing flowers, the divide between a queen and a commoner began to fade, replaced by the quiet certainty that they were stronger together.